the stolen peace. The wind came unannounced, as if trying to erase its own footsteps as it passed. On top of a hill where the mist never fully lifted stood a solitary temple, built from ancient wood, moss-covered stone, and years of silence. The monks who lived there spoke neither of wars nor of bygone days. They preferred to sweep the dust from the paths, draw water from the well, and watch the cranes in flight. Each gesture, a prayer. Each step, an answer that never needed to be spoken. Yet for some time now, something unseen had settled among them. It had no shape, no sound, no name, but it was as dense as smoke, slipping into the rice bowls, the morning chants, the dreams. An old monk named Daiki was the first to notice it, not because he was wiser, but because he had learned not to fear what cannot be touched. "Peace," he whispered one night, warming his hands around a cup of tea, "is not the absence of noise. It is the music heard only when everything within has fallen silent." That day, a white dove descended from the sky and perched on the temple's wooden railing. It looked at Daiki with clear eyes, as if it had known him since before time began. The old monk did not move. He simply gazed back, and in his heart, he knew the visit was no coincidence. The next morning, the young monk Ren awoke before dawn. The dream that had haunted him for weeks, an image of a half-open door and a figure cloaked in shadows, had returned, but this time something was different. The figure had spoken. "You are not the one who lost peace," it had said. "It was stolen, and you allowed it." Ren rose with his brow damp from sweat. The air smelled of ancient rain. Outside, the cherry trees quivered under a wind that seemed to come from another world. He moved quietly through the temple halls, searching for Master Daiki. He found him, as always, sitting by the pond. But this time, he wasn't looking at the water. He was looking at the sky, and his eyes were wet. "Master," Ren whispered, "something has been taken from us." "Yes," Daiki replied without turning, "and we still do not know what we gave in return." From that moment on, nothing was ever the same. The temple, though still calm, no longer felt like a refuge. The shadows stretched a little longer, and the silences grew so deep, they ached in the chest. Peace, like a flower freshly cut, remained beautiful on the outside, but it no longer had roots. In the days that followed, the temple remained still, at least on the surface. But in the heart of each monk, a tiny crack had begun to open, quiet and relentless, like water slowly carving into stone. Ren tried to maintain his routine. He rose before dawn, washed his face with the icy water from the stone basin, swept the fallen leaves from the courtyard, and fed the gray cat that had roamed the zendo for years like another master. But each action now felt like an echo, a soulless repetition, as if someone else were performing his life, merely imitating it. The morning prayers grew longer, not by choice, but because no one could quite find the moment to close their eyes and say amen. They were all waiting for something that never came, a presence that once filled the air and had now turned into absence. One morning, while the other monks sat in meditation, Ren slipped away to the old archive room, a rarely visited space where dusty scrolls, forgotten sutras, and ancient records were kept. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, only that something inside urged him forward, as if within those yellowed pages lay a clue, a trace of the balance they had lost. There, he found an unsigned text, written in shaky, ancient calligraphy. It read, "When the heart silences what it feels, silence becomes a prison. And when peace is offered without first being lived, what is given is a shadow, not light." Ren closed his eyes. The words pierced through him like a silent arrow. Was this what was happening to them all? Had they begun to offer the world a peace they no longer held within? Had they mistaken serenity for suppression? As if hearing his thoughts from afar, Master Daiki appeared in the doorway. He looked at Ren with a tenderness laced with a quiet sorrow, one that didn't weigh heavy, but floated like dusk dust in fading light. "Something was lost many years ago," the old man said, "but the echo of its absence has only now arrived." Ren looked up. "What was it, Master?" Daiki didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, gently brushing the spine of a book with his fingertips, like greeting an old friend, and sat on a wooden bench across from Ren. "A long time ago," he began, "when I was still as young as you, the temple was visited by a strange man. He wasn't a monk. He didn't come to pray. He simply asked to stay one night. We offered him tea, silence, and a place to sleep. He asked no questions, needed no answers. But at dawn, when he left, he took something with him." "What did he take?" Ren asked. Daiki smiled, though his smile held no joy. "The trust we had in our own stillness." Ren didn't fully understand. How could someone take something so intangible, so invisible? But the master gave no further explanation. He simply stood, and before leaving, said, "When someone enters your home and leaves in silence, you don't always know what they've taken, until one day, you look for it, and it's no longer there." That day, the sky remained gray. No rain fell, yet the air smelled of wet earth. The birds were silent. Not a single leaf dropped from the trees. It was as if the forest, too, was listening. That night, Ren didn't sleep. He lay down as always on his thin futon, covered by the same cotton blanket he had inherited from a monk who was no longer there. But sleep didn't come. His mind circled endlessly, like a water wheel with no current, trapped in thoughts that didn't know how to flow. The echo of Master Daiki's words stayed with him. The trust we had in our own stillness. What did it really mean? Could it be that, without realizing it, they had begun to fake peace, repeating hollow gestures, hiding behind robes and mantras, a deep tremble, an unseen wound? Ren sat up and stepped outside into the night. The sky was thick with clouds, no moon, no stars. The darkness wasn't complete, but it was enough to blur the edges of the landscape. Only the faint rustling of branches could be heard, as if they were whispering ancient secrets to one another. He sat at the edge of the pond, exactly where Master Daiki usually sat in the mornings. The water was still, as if waiting. Ren looked at his reflection. He didn't see a face, only a vague silhouette, undefined. He couldn't tell if it was because of the dark or something deeper. Then he remembered the dream, that shadowed figure, that phrase, "You're not the one who lost peace. It was stolen, and you allowed it." Had he been a silent accomplice? A witness to something he failed to stop? The next morning, as Ren served rice into his bowl, he noticed something different in the other monks. Nothing obvious, just a subtle misalignment, like a string slightly out of tune in a melody that had always seemed perfect. Brother Koji, who used to whistle every morning while tending the garden, was quiet. Brother Haru, who loved feeding the birds with breadcrumbs, hadn't come out of his cell. Even the temple cat, who would glide between the meditation cushions like a thread of smoke, was nowhere to be seen. Everything was still there, but nothing felt the same. "Peace isn't broken by a loud sound," Master Daiki said, sensing the unrest in Ren. "It unravels in silence. It doesn't leave all at once. It dissolves, like salt in water." Ren nodded, but his eyes betrayed the weight in his chest. "How do you recover something?" he asked, "when you don't even know when it was lost?" Daiki remained silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Sometimes the only way is to return to the beginning, not to find what was lost, but to understand why we stopped protecting it." That afternoon, Ren made a decision. He would enter the forest that surrounded the temple. No one had done so in years, not because it was forbidden, but because the forest was believed to be too thick, too old, too alive. He wasn't looking for answers or revelations. He simply wanted to hear something different, a sound that wasn't human, a language untouched by habit. He walked for hours, through roots and leaves, mist and the soft crunch of damp soil. With each step, he felt something invisible peeling away from him. Thoughts, forms, names. And when he felt completely lost, he found a smooth rock covered in moss and sat. In front of him stood a crooked, towering tree, one branch stretching toward the sky. At its base, a tiny flower grew between stones, fragile, yet fierce. Ren looked at it. He didn't think. He didn't analyze. He simply watched. And for one brief, imperceptible moment, the silence was real. But then, deep in the forest, something cracked. It wasn't a broken branch. It was something else. Something that came from within. A fracture. A memory. A truth that refused to stay hidden any longer. Ren opened his eyes, as if they'd been closed the whole time. And in that moment, he knew peace had not only been stolen from the temple, it had been taken from him. Long ago, before he had words for what was missing, the crack echoed like a bell beneath the earth. Though it seemed faint on the outside, within Ren it thundered. It shattered something that had been sealed for far too long. For years, he had learned to sit in silence, to steady his breath, to observe thoughts without judgment, like someone watching leaves float down a river. But this sound didn't come from outside. It wasn't a branch or a stone or an animal. It was memory. And memory, when denied for too long, doesn't return gently. Comes like a wave in a stormy night. Comes like a scream that has waited centuries to be heard. The forest remained in its ancient calm, but within Ren, everything stirred. The image struck suddenly. He was still a child, sitting at his mother's feet. A quiet, strong woman who used to comb his hair at dusk while speaking to him of stars. Her voice was warm water. But one day she stopped speaking. Not from illness, not from fatigue, but from pain. One day, a man arrived at their home. He said no name, gave no reason. He stayed only one night. But when he left, he took with him the peace that once lived in her eyes. She was never the same again. And from that day on, Ren learned to be silent, to obey, to pretend. Years later, when he arrived at the temple, he mistook silence for comfort. He mistook emptiness for healing. He became a devoted disciple, obedient, disciplined, kind. But that wound was never touched, only covered, buried. The figure in his dream, the shadow that spoke, it all pointed to that moment, to that single day when his world changed, and he didn't know why. He came back to himself with a dry throat and trembling hands. The forest hadn't changed, but he had. He stood, still dazed, and wandered aimlessly through leaf-covered paths. The sky was darkening, yet he felt no fear. There was something in the night that welcomed him, as if the forest knew what he had remembered, as if the trees could listen without judgment. Eventually, he found a clearing where the wind swirled in slow spirals. At its center, a fallen tree became his seat. He closed his eyes. He breathed. Slow, deep, painful. The truth was clear now. You cannot offer peace from an open wound. You cannot guide others to serenity while walking over embers hidden beneath your robes. Everything that remains unacknowledged will speak to us from the shadows. Everything left unhealed becomes a mist that poisons all we touch. He remembered Master Daiki's words. What is offered without having first been lived is only shadow, not light. And for the first time, Ren understood. The temple had not lost its peace in a single day. That strange visitor hadn't been the only one to take something. Each monk, including himself, had slowly surrendered pieces of their integrity. They had pretended to be fine, had silenced doubts, closed their eyes to each other's pain, repeated mantras without heart. They had kept the order in exchange for their truth. That was the theft, not from the outside, from within. Ren returned to the temple late that night. The oil lamps flickered gently. He walked into the meditation hall. Daiki was there as if waiting. "You remembered," the elder said, without needing to ask. Ren sat across from him. He didn't speak. He couldn't, but his eyes did. "Memory is not always a punishment," Daiki continued. "Sometimes it's the beginning of true compassion." Ren bowed his head. For the first time in many years, a tear slipped down his cheek. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't guilt. It was something deeper, like something inside him had finally come home. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice trembling. Daiki looked at him with the gentleness of someone who had already crossed that same abyss. "Now we learn to dwell in the wound without turning it into a prison. And then, perhaps, if the wind allows, peace will return. Not because we summon it, but because we no longer fear it." That night, Ren didn't meditate. He didn't chant a single sutra. He didn't search for answers. He simply stayed awake, listening to his own breath, watching how every corner of the temple looked different. More fragile, more human, more real. And in the heart of that fragility, something very small began to heal. The next morning, a thick mist covered the temple like a heavy cloak. It wasn't just any fog. It felt as if the world itself had chosen to go soft, to blur its edges so that things might be seen differently, without rigidity, without fixed form. Ren rose without hurry. His movements were the same as always, yet something in him had shifted. Not in his body, nor in his face. It was deeper than that, a kind of presence, as if he had stopped shielding himself from himself. He walked down to the inner garden, where Brother Koji used to tend to the young tea shoots. There he was, kneeling beside a withering plant, silent. Ren approached without a word. He didn't come to guide him or offer comfort, just to be there. Without looking up, Koji spoke. "Have you ever felt absent from your own life?" Ren knelt beside him. "Yes, for longer than I ever dared admit." Koji nodded. He stared at the plant's brittle leaves and said, "This peace we've built here, what if it became a refuge that kept us from feeling?" Ren took his time before answering, not because he didn't know what to say, but because honesty needs room to be born. Maybe, but not everything was false, just unfinished. Koji looked up for the first time in days. In his eyes was a quiet blend of sadness and gratitude, like someone had finally given words to something he didn't know how to name. That same afternoon, in the prayer hall, Brother Haru returned. No one said a thing. He simply sat down, back straight, eyes half closed. But his hands trembled, and instead of hiding them, he left them visible, like a statement. One by one, the other monks came in, some in silence, some with eyes cast low. There was no ceremony, no direction, only presence, sharing the same unspoken question, the same inner fatigue, the same fracture. Then Daiki entered. He walked slowly, his bamboo staff tapping gently against the floor. He stopped in front of them, gazing at them like a father watching his children return from a long, unannounced journey. "We're not here to reclaim peace," he said gently. "We're here to stop lying to ourselves." No one moved. "For years," Daiki went on, "we held a balance built on repetition. And the more perfect it seemed, the further we drifted from ourselves. We created a decorative calm. We offered it to the world like medicine. But it was hollow." Ren felt every word cut through him, not as blame but as cleansing, as if the master, by speaking them aloud, was dusting off something that had once been true. And yet, Daiki added, "This is not failure, this is rebirth." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when something breaks open inside, and you choose to listen. "Maybe real peace," Rin said, "isn't the kind that's imposed as a rule, but the kind that comes when we stop running from our own noise." "Maybe," Koji echoed, "it can only be born when we let it share space with pain." Daiki closed his eyes, and a single tear slid down his cheek, slow, like rain traveling the curve of a lotus leaf. "Then this is our true practice," he said. "Not sitting like statues, but breathing inside what's broken. Not pushing pain away, but inviting it in for tea." The days that followed were different. Not better, not happier, but more alive. Some monks allowed themselves to cry for the first time in years. Others spoke of wounds they thought were long gone. One even admitted that he had never truly felt peace, only obedience. And yet, in the midst of it all, the temple felt calmer. As if by no longer pretending perfection, imperfection itself had become sacred. In the afternoons, Ren would sit by the pond and write. Not sutras, not sacred texts, just loose thoughts, questions, memories, fragments of whatever was rising from within. Words like these, "Peace that is imposed is not peace. The real kind is born in imperfection, and only blooms when we stop demanding it to be eternal." The cat returned. The cherry trees began to release their blossoms without hesitation. And one morning, without being called, the white dove returned to the temple. It landed on the exact same railing where they had first seen it. Daiki looked at it and whispered, "It never left. It was just waiting for us to come home." The white dove remained on the temple railing for hours, still and quiet, its eyes half closed as if it too were meditating. No one dared disturb it. Even the cat, who usually chased anything with wings, simply watched with a kind of reverence. Ren gazed at it for a long time, remembering the first time it appeared. It had been just before everything began to unravel. Was it a sign? A warning? A silent witness to something they had yet to understand? Master Daiki sat beside the young monk. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something heavier, a memory beginning to rise from deep within. "Ran," the old man said gently, "I think it's time I tell you what I didn't say before, about the visitor." Ren straightened. The breeze was soft, and the wind chimes whispered like distant voices. "Who was he?" Ren asked. Daiki paused, not from forgetfulness, but reverence, as if the words needed to be chosen carefully so as not to shatter something fragile. "He arrived in spring," the master began. "I remember the plum trees were in bloom. He brought no belongings, no offerings, not even a name, just his body and his eyes. And those eyes, they were like a bottomless mirror. When you looked into them, something inside you started to come undone." Ren's brow furrowed slightly, not in judgment, but in full attention. "He stayed only one night. He asked for nothing," Daiki continued. "He simply sat with us, didn't speak, didn't eat, but just being near him, it stirred everything we'd hidden. I was young then. I believed peace was about order, about control, about eliminating emotion. But that night, I felt fear, not of him, but of what he made me see, that my silence wasn't real. It was a defense. In the morning, when he left, something in the temple felt different, still but not peaceful, like something essential had evaporated. Trust, transparency, faith in our practice." Ren looked down. "Why did no one ever speak of it?" he asked. Daiki sighed. Because we didn't know how. Because it was easier to blame his presence than face the truth. He didn't take anything from us. He only revealed what had already begun to rot inside. No one can steal what you guard with love and honesty, but what you abandon, someone will pick up, even by accident. The master's words stayed with Run for days. He began to revisit the temple's old scrolls, not searching for doctrine, but for signs. In one of the oldest, barely legible from time, he found a line written in fading ink. The visitor does not come to take anything from you. He only brings light to where you cast shadow. What leaves with him was already lost. Ren closed his eyes. In that moment, he understood. The man had never been a thief. He had been a mirror. And what vanished after his visit was the mask. One night, while everyone slept, Ren left the temple and walked into the forest. He wasn't looking for answers. He was listening for the echo of his own heart. He returned to the clearing where, days before, he had remembered his wound. He sat on the same stone, now cold and damp. But he wasn't afraid. He carried in his chest something he hadn't known how to name before. Now he called it presence. The wind blew. Leaves danced in the shadows. And in the darkness, he felt a vibration. It wasn't outside him. It was his soul touching ground. Then he spoke, though no one was there to hear. If you come again, stranger, I will meet you without masks. I have no peace to fake, only truth to share. And the forest, in its wordless language, replied with a soft murmur. Not approval, not rejection, just life. When Ren returned at dawn, the monks were already gathered. Not to meditate, just to sit, sharing tea in silence. But in that silence, for the first time in a long time, there was no tension. There was space. For grief, for laughter, for not knowing. Ren sat with them. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. Peace, the real kind, hadn't returned, because it had never left. They were only just learning, at last, how to see it without disguising it, how to live it even when it hurt, how to stop hiding the shadow from it, how to let it speak. And in that silent conversation, the healing began. The days passed like raindrops falling on stone. Unhurried, silent, not trying to leave a mark, yet leaving one all the same. The temple was no longer the same, and yet its walls hadn't changed. The doors still creaked in the wind. The bowls were the same. The garden paths followed their usual curves. What had changed was invisible. A subtle underground current that had finally begun to flow. Each monk, in their own way, had started to release words, emotions, memories. Not as confession, but like opening small windows to let the air in. Brother Haru finally spoke of losing his sister. Brother Koji spoke of the anger he had once felt toward his father, hidden beneath years of discipline. Brother Tetsu shared the shame that had kept him from singing, even though his voice was as beautiful as water falling into a copper bowl. Ren didn't speak much. He listened. His presence, once rigid, proper, almost ceremonial, had softened, become nearly translucent. He had come to understand something not written in any book. That silence isn't always wisdom, and true peace isn't constant stillness, but honest motion. One evening, while sweeping leaves in the courtyard, Ren found Daiki sitting at the edge of the pond. He wasn't speaking. He held a paper in his hands, eyes fixed on the water, as though reading in its reflection what the paper refused to say. Ren approached. The master handed him the scroll without looking at him. It was a letter, old, ancient even, signed only with a single initial, Y. It read, "The day I crossed the threshold of the temple, I didn't come to destroy anything. I only wanted to see if the peace you spoke of was real." In every gesture, I saw beauty but also stiffness. In every word, wisdom but also fear. I left before dawn, not out of rejection, but out of respect. I cannot stay in places where truth cannot breathe. I didn't steal peace. I only lifted the veil. Run read the letter in silence, feeling a mixture of shame, humility, and gratitude. "Why did you keep it?" he asked. "Because I wasn't ready to understand it," Daiki replied. They both sat in silence for a long time. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the pond mirrored a sky tinged red, like a wound finally beginning to heal. That night, all the monks gathered around the fire. There was no ceremony, just a shared need to be together, without purpose, without duty, without roles. Daiki spoke first. "For years, we tried to preserve something sacred, and without realizing it, we turned that effort into a cage. A golden cage, yes, but a cage nonetheless. The temple," Koji said, glancing up at the wooden beams, "became a mirror, one that only showed us what we wanted to see. And we feared the visitor," added Haru, "because we didn't understand him, because his silence wasn't like ours." Then Rin spoke. His voice had changed. It wasn't the voice of a disciple, but of a human being. "I don't want to pretend to be at peace anymore. I want to learn how to be present, even when I'm broken." The fire crackled. No one replied, but in the silence that followed, every heart nodded. A few days later, Daiki left the temple. It wasn't a tragic goodbye, or a heroic one. He simply rose one morning, packed a small bag with tea and rice, tucked his old staff beneath his arm, and walked out the front gate, alone. Ren watched him from the top of the temple steps. He didn't call out. He didn't try to stop him. He knew Daiki wasn't fleeing. He wasn't escaping. He was answering something, a cycle, an inner rhythm. And in his slow walk down the forest path, there was more peace than in all the prayers they had ever chanted together. The temple fell silent, but it was a different kind of silence. No longer a shield. Now it was a fertile space. Birds returned to nest in the eaves. The cat rested at the monk's feet during meditation. And the flowers in the garden, dormant for years, began to bloom again. Not because anyone cared for them differently, but because at last truth was in the air. One afternoon, walking alone, Ren looked up at the sky and remembered the words he had written days before. "Peace is not something you attain. It's what arises when you stop being afraid to lose anything." He smiled, not because everything was resolved, but because he could finally be at peace, with not being at peace all the time. And in that brief, quiet moment, so simple, so deep, he understood. Sometimes, true peace only comes after it has been stolen, because only then do we learn to honor it, not as a prize, but as a mystery. The sun didn't rise with force that morning, but with a shy amber light, as if asking permission to touch the temple walls. A soft breeze wandered through the empty corridors like an old melody recalling what had long been forgotten. Ren stood once again before the pond. He was no longer the young man who had once awakened, terrified by a dream. His face now reflected all he had lived. No brighter, no wiser, but more transparent. Beside him, Master Daiki stood in silence, though this time he seemed to carry no weight. There was space between them, but no distance. "Have you understood?" Daiki asked, without taking his eyes off the water. "Not completely," Rin replied, "but I'm no longer running. That's enough." The master extended his hand toward the water. He didn't touch the surface, just held his palm open, as if offering something invisible. Rin gazed at the gesture for a long time before finally asking, "Where has peace been all this time?" Daiki smiled gently. "Where it's always been. Where no one can steal it from you." Here. He pointed to his chest. Then, Ren said, his voice trembling, who stole it from me? The master slowly closed his hand and placed it over his own heart. The one who turned away from it. Me? Daiki nodded. Not out of malice, but out of forgetfulness. Not out of disdain, but out of fear. We all do it. We believe peace is a place, a person, a moment, a state. But it's none of those things. It's a choice, a quiet loyalty to what never changes, even when everything else does. Ren closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he saw no half-open doors, no shadows. He saw an open field, an endless sky, and the sound of his own steps on the damp earth. He opened his eyes and breathed. The air smelled of things that are real. And now, Master? He asked. Now, nothing. Nothing. Now, just live. Sweep the floor. Serve the tea. Look at the sky. Plant a flower. Feel the wind. And remember, what is stolen outside can always be recovered within. Ren bowed his head, not out of sorrow, but in reverence. The pond remained still. A white dove flew above them, vanishing into the bamboo trees. The temple had changed, and yet, it was the same. In the zendo, the monks began chanting the morning sutras. Ren's voice joined theirs without urgency, without doubt, without needing to be heard. His silence no longer hurt. His stillness was no longer a cage. Peace is not something to reclaim. Peace is something to remember. And once it is remembered, there is no one left who can steal it.